like I have a very short runway to get a lot done. There's no doubt, but today's currency is all about Gen AI.
State CIOs are headed to the Big Easy for NASCIO's annual conference later this month. The head of that organization, the chief CIO Wrangler, has been on the job for a remarkable 20 years, and he has seen some stuff. We are putting the future of state CIOs in context.
TFIC takes you deeper into the stories that are shaping the future of state and local government.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
You're not Buzz Lightyear.
I'm Siri.
And I'm Google.
And I am Alexa.
Alexa seems so smart. I think we'd have a lot to talk about.
Pew, pew. Doug Robinson, welcome to the Future in Context.
Paul Taylor, old friend, it's good to be here. Good to be here. Have a chat about the past and the future.
So let's start with this. Congratulations on 20 years as executive director of NASCIO.
Thank you, sir. It's been a rewarding and fun journey, and not surprisingly, certainly much longer than I intended to stay. It's the average tenure of chief executives of associations is a little over 7 years, according to our friends at ASAE, which we're members of, with the Association of Association Executives. And so I look at that data, and I'm always surprised to see that I'm sitting at over 20 years.
To what do you attribute your tripling the national average?
Well, fear. Maybe fear is a good motivator. No, I certainly had no intention when I agreed to this position. I was actually looking at a 3 to 4 year. I signed a 3 year kind of deal up front, thinking that would probably be it. Coming out right out of the public sector, right out of state government. Actually, leaving state government after leaving the Capitol on Friday afternoon, and starting on Monday at NASCIO. So that was a big surprise. So I think part of that is just the amazing people that I get to work with every day, and just I have a lot of gratitude for what I get to do because certainly, as you know, I love state information technology issues, both technical and policy, but more importantly, the leadership. And so I get to do that every day, and every day is a surprise because we have that's our motto at NASCIO: expect surprises, because we always have a issue with a CIO turnover. You know that, so it's part of that is just it's just the fact that we get to work with a lot of great people in the public and private sector. They have a commitment and a passion for what they're doing, and we get to kind of be involved directly in that, and hopefully lead when we can, and advocate for them. So when you love what you're doing, it's kind of easy to forget that it's been 20 years.
When you first took the job, maybe you didn't think in these terms, but did you have any imagination of what 20 years out would look like in terms of public sector IT?
Not really, not really. I had no experience in associations. I obviously, as you know, going back to the Nassar days, we were both actively involved. So I was actively involved in the association of the profession, but I had certainly no vision of what I was really trying to get through the first couple of years, and really the first 3 years, because NASCIO had just completed in 2003. They completed a new business plan, a strategic business plan tied into their new strategic plan, and essentially they had a lot of expectations and metrics that they handed me. And it really, the bottom line was the statement that their aspirationally, they wanted NASCIO to be the preeminent association representing state information technology. That was kind of their bottom line. And they handed me a playbook, which I began to question how much we could really get done in that short period of time. So I told them, I said, this is at least a 3 year playbook. You look at all the things that they had in there. And part of that was just understanding, the role, understanding what was going to happen with our corporate members. Because at that point, I think we had less than 100 corporate members. And so they were looking at, is that a future for support, but also building trust with organizational stakeholders. And that really wasn't there in a broad sense. It was limited, and we didn't have deep relationships with a lot of our strategic partner associations, those other groups that are critical, other state officials that are critical to the success of the CIO. So that was kind of my first order of business, was to begin to build those. So at that point, I was heads down, hair on fire, and wasn't thinking. Now I spend a lot of time thinking about the future, but at that point, it was really focused on just making sure that we were a vital organization, and we would financially be successful. And that always wasn't the case.
So here we are, 2024, 20 years on. How much of the playbook was realized, and how much of the original commander's intent, to use an Army phrase, is still in place?
Mhm. I think not quite all of the playbook. I jettisoned a few things that were just, I thought, unreasonable, or externalities that the association could not really execute on. So I had a negotiation with the executive committee to say, I think there's key things we need to focus on, and let's not have so many key key results. We had so many metrics that they wanted tracked. I think you really focus on those strategic ones and get those done. So certainly, I think the major ones have all been achieved. Part of that, and like, you can appreciate that, part of it was NASIO at that point, I think, had only 45 states as members. And so that was one of my first orders of business, at least from my perspective, was to say we need all the states and territories to be members of the association. We need to set that as a kind of a measure to the outside marketplace, that all the states see the value proposition of being part of this group. And at that point, there were, again, 5 states that were not. I had kind of rank ordered my own. So no, did we finish all those? Absolutely not. But I did deliberately jettison some of those. But we did a good job in tracking. Some of them I just thought were not critically important to the success of the association. We're still working on those today. In many cases, a lot of those were around things like government affairs. We had no government affairs activities, nominal, really kind of nascent at that point. Started, the first flying was 2001, but it was really, I wouldn't call it haphazard, but just not well organized in terms of sustainability. It was a kind of a one shot deal. 2 days a year, you're going to focus on federal government. And I said, we need to, the federal government and the state government are inextricably entwined with this funding, and the states are the agents of the federal government. For billions of dollars of federal programs. We need to be more engaged with our federal partners. We need to go with them with advocacy. And so that took a few years. That was a good example of one that took a few years of building up. I did a lot of that work, quite frankly, not understanding what I was doing, because I had no background in government affairs other than working with state legislators. So that took a while. And then ultimately, 2008, we established an office in DC, hired a government affairs director, and we've going to keep moving forward ever since then. So those are the big items that I look at and say, well, that was a successful kind of my interpretation of their strategic vision.
On a number of fronts, you have been involved in doing shuttle diplomacy. You just mentioned the federal example,
Mhm.
but with many other allied organizations where, uh, just as at a cabinet table, the CIO is but one individual and has to have relationships around the table. Around NASIO's table, in order to be successful, who are the key players in terms of allied organizations?
We actually maintain a strategic partner list, and I don't like to rate or rank my partners, but clearly, National Governor Association, all of our CIOs are appointed. All of them are appointed by the governor, and so they serve as an at will in that position. So we've had a very long partnership with the National Governors Association, NASBO, State Association of Budget Officers, right? A very strong. If you look at a lot of our survey data, will say that from the CIO perspective, their BFF right off the bat needs to be the budget director, because penultimate kind of policy document, if it's not in the budget, the CIO is not going to get to accomplish that. So the budget officers, the procurement officials, very strong relationship with NASPO, certainly. And then the other that we work with regularly are all those kind of, you mentioned, the the lines of business, APHSA for human services. I just spoke actually last week I spoke on a webcast with NASWA, the state workforce. We have a very strong partnership with them. Federation of Tax Administrators, National Association of Auditors and Controllers, a NASAC, long-standing relationship with the NASAC group for auditors, controllers, and treasurers. So all those acronyms kind of just come right off my lips here because they're all front and center to what we do in addition to those into those federal agencies and other groups. But we have, again, I think most of my time in terms of external speaking over the last 15 years or so have been at the conferences of those strategic partners, bringing the CIO voice and the message of state technology to those groups that aren't necessarily focused on technology, but focusing on delivered value to the citizens. So you're right; it's a critically important part of our strategic approach, and also it's reflected in our mission statement, which talks about building trusted partnerships. So that's something we really focus on.
And for the careful listener, we will stipulate that you love and respect all your partners, but we
Absolutely.
won't go down
I
the same
I love
the
all
whole
I
list.
love all my children equally. You're right, Paul.
You mentioned conferences, and NASIO is known for its conferences over the years. Are there moments that mattered, particularly like standout milestone moments from the conferences over a year that come top of mind?
Certainly the post-pandemic conference 2021, we navigated through all of that by having virtual events and not getting together. We made a decision to hold our 2021 conference in Seattle in person with all of the requisite health regulations and accommodations and certifications in place. And I think the energy around that conference was absolutely amazing, Paul, because I think people were so fired up and so ready to get together. We had certainly a smaller than we expected normally we would have for an annual conference, but we were gratified that almost 600 people showed up. And they all wore their masks and they all had a great time. So yeah, there's certainly a number of others in between where we had phenomenal keynotes or kind of excellent sessions that I can all think about.
I do want to ask you about one keynote, though, 2012. Um, and it was Ray Kurzweil
I remember
talking about the singularity.
Baltimore. Yep.
And
Yeah.
there are multiple reactions, but the overwhelming vibe from that room as folks filed out was, wow, if this singularity is real, are we not ready for it?
Right.
And I wrote about it recently for Government Technology, that speech and that notion of the singularity. And when he used to talk about the singularity being something that was coming in 2040, it seemed like a long way off,
Hmm.
even in 2012. Now it's a generation out. Do you still think about Kurzweil's notion? Do you think that the IT community, the state CIOs, are thinking beyond what we understand AI to be now to that singularity moment where computationally they are equal or better than humans?
I think certainly we, in fact, I saw Ray's op-ed piece. What is it? Just less than a month ago, and read that and thought about his kind of vision. And I think there are some that reflect on that and rethink about those. But I think you think about their horizon in terms of their tenure, which right now median tenure of a state CIO is 19 and a half months. At the zenith, which was I think 2009, we've been tracking this for 30 years. It was 36 months, so 3 years. That was the high point of CIO tenure right before the big election in 2010. I think they have such a short time span that they are so focused on that period of time that I think many of them probably don't sit back and think about what's going to happen 10, 20, 30 years out. We certainly talk about things internally at NASIO, but we also are trying to be responsive to our members, which always has this sense of immediacy. Like I have a very short runway to get a lot done. And today's currency is all about Gen AI. I can't have a conversation without somebody asking about what the future. Right now, I think the state CIOs do not see this as a major threat. So very few of them believe that there's going to be things like employee disruption or employee replacement or skills. They see it more as a challenge of overcoming the current barriers to broader adoption. So certainly employee upskilling is one of those. I don't think they're viewing this right now as a replacement, like you said, that not looking at singularity as a replacement to their current models. But I think as we get closer to reality, yeah, you may be absolutely right on target. Is that that's going to be another notion of that? What are the art of the possible for digital services, for example, given the fact that we are continually faced with a workforce crisis in many disciplines, particularly cybersecurity and state government. We're still faced with the necessity to have more skills, and the state IT workforce has not been growing, other than growing older, like you and I. So,
So I want to spend just another second or two on a little bit of inside baseball.
mhm.
I've always been interested in this, but I've never asked you. As a membership organization, what unique advantages and disadvantages does NASCIO have in pursuing its members' interests and also advancing the proposition of public sector IT as a legitimate player?
Ah, yes, I've spoken about this. The double-edged sword. The blade swings both ways. And I think, we often have that inside baseball, the inside joke is, of course, at a membership organization, the great thing about it are the members. And the worst thing about it can be the members, right? So it's like, let's work as I spent my first 15 years of my career at a major university. The inside joke there was this would be a great place to work if it wasn't for the students. And I think you got that same challenge. So yeah, they make it's great because you make those relationships, but they also can have unreasonable expectations and unreasonable demands on an association where our focus, particularly for our corporate members, is all about member equity. It's just like we do in the public sector. So whether you're California or Vermont, we treat all of our state members, with that type of member equity. So that's the continuing challenge. The other is the fact that the states, as you know, is our motto is you've seen one state, you've seen one state. And so they're all over in terms of maturity. And we have to carefully balance what we're doing with the expectation that not all states can achieve, like you said, the promise of what might be talking about in terms of some of these emerging technologies. And so I'm constantly thinking about that is we are not going to rate or rank our members. We're not going to embarrass them. We're not going to do anything which presents them, certainly the CIO in particular, any kind of awkward position with their leadership. I always internally talk about, we do not want to put any CIO in jeopardy in terms of the fact that they are an appointed position. They will do that on their own in many cases. We know that for a fact. So that's kind of you're right. That's kind of the challenge is making sure we focus on that all the time. States are, as you well know very well, they're all over the place in terms of their level of achievement, and so we try to do a careful balance, always recognizing that there's gaps, and so that's been a major shift when I came on board was to make sure that we are providing recommendations. That was not the NASCIO way. Before that, it was much more of I guess, reports and surveys by committee. And I took a much different approach to say, no, we need to help the membership by identifying those particular opportunities and recommendations. So almost every report we put out has certainly an action list for the CIOs that say, based on X, Y, and Z, this hypothesis, we've seen this, surveyed our members. These are 5 things that states need to do to advance that maturity. So it's a challenge. You identified it well.
Go with me into the Wayback Machine, and this predates your arrival at NASCIO, but both of us were around for it.
Hmm.
It wasn't a very singable name, but it was the National Association of State Information Resource Executives, or NASIRE, replaced by the much more singable NASIO. What was the impetus for that change, and why did it matter?
I was one of those information resources. I at that point was executive director of the Information Resources Management Commission in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That was my role. So I was highly vested in NASIRE in that model. The impetus behind it was, came from executive committee action, and particularly at that point, who the president, who was my boss, Aladona Valicente, who was CIO in the Commonwealth. She was president of the association, and she strongly believed that we needed to reflect the growing importance of this new position that had first been established in 1995 called the Chief Information Officer. She was one. It was growing. There were more and more states that have the CIO moniker on the executive branch appointed by the governor. And there was certainly some tension around that shift. There were a number of people who didn't favor that move, as you would expect. Changing the name of an association can be rather dangerous, and we've seen other instances where that didn't work so well. But I think she, as the other associations reflected the name of the officer, like NASBO, the state chief budget officer, she felt NASCIO needed to be specific and not generic because, as you said, nobody in the marketplace really understood what NASA or what was this group, but it was very collegial. It was very open, and the suggestion to go to a NASCIO meant that it was going to be more focused on a single individual, an IT leader in each state. But I think clearly that has worked out. And it worked out well. It was I think a really really good decision at the time. It was fraught with, I know, a lot of internal machinations and discussions and questions around the change and was it going to work and establishing a new name. But no one really questions that 20 some years. That was 2001, and so that was the transition. But I was part of that just as a state government leader at that point. I went through that change, so I understood it, but had to embrace it a few years later. Did I had any idea that I would be leading the organization when that was going on? But that was I think a pivotal. When you think about those seminal moments, that was clearly a seminal moment to make the shift, and then the focus had to be on highlighting and elevating the role of the CIO, and half the states didn't have one at that point. They had an individual with a title that perhaps, or they had responsibilities and authority for that role, but they didn't have the title. So that was another part of my role, was to bring everybody to the table and kind of embrace that regardless of their title, and also then again advocate for each state to have a quote CIO, a position which they all do today.
That act of platforming and rebranding people who were regarded as IT managers or IT directors, and what was then still a fairly novel but kind of cool sounding name of Chief Information Officer.
Right.
It really made them bigger than they were, and NASCIO, I don't think, gets the credit that it deserves in that elevation. And you were on the ground, both outside for the first couple of years and then inside for 20. Did that bear the fruit that you thought it would?
Well, we have work to do, as you've said. There's still, I think, the stereotype that the state CIO role is. I always use the phrase is about boxes and wires and green blinking lights. And I think NASCIO's view of that, it's not a back office function. It's actually pivotal to the transformation. It's part of the fabric of state government. It's pivotal to that transformation and to that leadership. And so I kind of bristle at the it's a back office role. No, it's actually front and center in today's environment. It's driving in course many states, and so that's kind of part of my constant message as I preach about that. And as you said, we still have some way to go for some states, but part of that is simply the fact that the view of that role is much more as perceived as a technical guru and not a change leader. And I think that's the shift that certainly I've been trying to articulate. And we still have. I even talked to transition teams. I talked to legislators. Their view of the CIO is the technical guru, boxes and wires. And I remind them that's the traditional CIO perhaps, but the contemporary CIO is all about partnerships, collaboration, leading change. And many of our CIOs today, in fact, do not have a technical background at all. Right? They come from that business side, and I think so. That's the message I like to bring is your CIO is the business leader of technology within your state, just like you have lines of business leaders within human resources and labor and transportation. The CIO, deserves that kind of appreciation for the role that they bring, because it's across all of those horizontal cylinders of excellence the CIO has to work through. And so I think certainly in many states we have that today, but there's still a few where that role needs to be perceived at a higher order of magnitude, and that's why our conferences are different in that we're not promoting that through demonstrations and exhibit halls and things like that. We don't do any of that. It's all about the leadership and networking opportunities and educational opportunities, as opposed to can I show you the latest product and the latest bright shiny object, right? So that's deliberate on our part, deliberate on my part to make those events like that.
With the milestone pivot from NASIR to NASIO, the organization made a commitment to staying with the one that brung them, or dancing with the one that brung them.
Right.
We're now in a space where there's a number of technology related chiefs, technology officers, information security officers, experience officers, and the flavor of the month appears to be chief AI
Officer.
officers. How do they all work together in some kind of federated environment that works for all concerned? And should they all be reporting to the CIO?
Ah, yes, yes. A question I get quite often, Paul, as you can imagine. And so my answer to that is that's up for the state, and I say that with tongue in cheek because, as you know, lots of chiefs in the kitchen. The That is often by default and not by design. And I say that because there's a notion of this position: chief data officer, chief privacy officer, like you said, chief information security officer, all those chiefs. And quite frankly, I think there's not a lot of thought given as well. That seems like an IT role, so we're going to put that under the CI organization. I agree with you. I mean, I think it needs more consideration, and it may not be the most appropriate place, but it is what it is right now until, like you said, it matures a little bit more. What we have done, and again, deliberately, and started almost a dozen years ago now, is to kind of embrace what the as is and to provide opportunities for these individuals with our leadership summits. We just finished one the end of July, very successful events. And so we started that over a dozen years ago with the CIOs, with our CIO Confidential series, and then we've expanded that. A few years later, we expanded to the chief security officers, so we host that community of practice, the chief privacy officers, the state deputies, and the enterprise architecture. So we bring them all together for 3 days of leadership meetings in the summer where they all meet as a cohort. They meet simultaneously, but separately, and then they come together. And that has really been, I think, I'm really proud of how successful that has become, because it brings all those people together. So we deliberately have we brought those folks together to have those kind of conversations you're talking about, is how they all interact, because they're all in a different space. The majority of the chief privacy officers do not report to the CIO, right? The new ones are all in risk management or budget office. And so we're still bringing those folks together because we host the community of practice to give them a home, so that they have a place that they get together. As you mentioned, the chief AI officer, we have not articulated a policy position or recommendation that states create an AI officer, but certainly some of those folks have that responsibility. So that may be part of our cohort in the future. Our emerging leaders group, the first year of that was just this year, 2024, and we had a remarkable group of folks that were all identified by their CIOs to come to a 2.5 day kind of classroom experience for emerging leaders. And I think that's what's needed. We need more of that in the public sector to encourage people to stay in the public sector. It's such a challenge to bring talent in and to retain them over time. So we see, a lot of good talent leaving to go to the private sector when we could use them. I've been in the public sector essentially my entire career, so I'm a real advocate for that. So that's kind of what we've been doing. You're right, a lot of chiefs. So we've kind of embraced that, recognizing that that's another one of those externalities that the states are going to do, whether we say something or not. We can hope to influence them. We certainly have done that with the chief security officers. One of the major pieces I worked on many, many years ago was recognizing that role and also encouraging every state to have a chief information security officer and elevate that person out of the bowels of the data center, out of the basement into a strategy role, as you said, put them in the CIO organization as part of that constellation of officers, and recognizing that cybersecurity was going to be and continues to be critical to the success of states and reducing risk. It's all about that, and so we do try to have some influence on the marketplace by kind of positing a strong position on a number of things, because I think our members want that. We hear that from our members. We hear if NASCIO has a position, let's get it out there and not be shy about it, because it may help a state make a strategic decision to move forward on. Might be a discipline, it might be embracing architecture, program management, portfolio management, we data quality. We will have an opinion on all of those if we can.
Name one thing that the public sector IT community simply has to do to stay relevant and meaningful in this environment.
It would be easy to say cybersecurity, but I really believe it's to improve the delivery of digital services to our citizens. I am having been involved in the 2001 call to action from NASCIO. I've said this to our own membership. I don't believe the states have delivered on the promise of everything that could be done. So they're behind their counterparts in the private sector in terms of consumers. And so I think one thing they can do to really maintain that relevance is to embrace, all the new kind of modern approaches to delivering human-centered design and journey mapping. We need consistent and pervasive digital credentials that are secure. Digital identity management is certainly one of our top items. But I think if in order to make all of that real, I think being able for citizens to conduct business with their state government in a fashion that is commensurate to their private sector counterparts in banking and retail, whatever they're doing, which creates, and it's not a technology issue, that it's all about change management. It's about the cultural resistance to that, the agencies, what I call "you're not the boss of me" governance. We've always done it this way. We don't want to embrace the enterprise view, and I think that's all of those constraints. When we ask our CIOs, our leaders, what's the major challenge around that, there's two things. One is the available resources and funding, but the other one is, quite frankly, organizational. Is the resistance to change, the resistance to become, part of that enterprise. States don't really need to do a better job in today's environment to bring these technologies to bear on serving the public in whatever way. That today is probably a 3 by 5 inch piece of glass in their hand is where they want to do their business. The states need to, the states need to embrace that kind of modern approach. It's very difficult.
This has been a pleasure, Doug. Good getting caught up. Thank you for your work, and looking forward to the next NASCIO in September.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Doug Robinson, Executive Director, National Association of State CIOs, with a 20-year track record that speaks for itself. Robinson convenes member CIOs again on September 29th in New Orleans. Jazz, beads, and a walk down Bourbon Street may be involved. Government Technology will have team coverage with Noel Nell, Thad Reuter, and Jewel Patterson-Gordon, reporting from the annual NASCIO conference in the Big Easy. You can find it all at govtech.com/NASCIO. Our editorial and production team includes Theo Douglas, Zoe Manzanetti, and Kate Albrecht. Our executive editor is the aforementioned Noel Nell. And Ashley Silver will be back next week, but she's got a new assignment in addition to the podcast. She is co-anchor of the GT Fast 5, the stories of government solutions, all wrapped up in a tidy 90-second package. Look for it on LinkedIn and YouTube, and then share it on your socials. For Ashley, I'm Paul Taylor. Thanks for listening. Always forward.